Hello, good afternoon, everyone. It's absolutely wonderful to be here, and I'm very grateful to the Tokyo Metropolitan Government, to the Japan Foundation, and to the British Council for inviting me here today. Before I go any further, you can probably tell I have a slightly husky voice this afternoon, probably a result of too much talking yesterday. So I promise I won't go on quite as long as I did yesterday for those of you who are in danger of hearing any of what you heard yesterday twice. Broadly speaking, what I wanted to do today was to give you a bit of an overview of the role, purpose and function of Arts Council England, and hopefully that will give you a bit of background and context for the discussions that you're having today about how arts councils in Japan may themselves move forward. So what I'm going to talk about in the next half an hour or so is a little bit of history, where the Arts Council in England has come from, what we do and how we do it. I'm going to talk a bit about partnerships and how we work in partnership with other organisations. And I thought it would be helpful to perhaps reveal some of the challenges and opportunities that we face as an organisation currently. And I also want to say some words about measuring our impact, because of course that is a very important thing that we need to do. I'm also going to pepper this presentation with some slides which show some of the work that we support, and I think it's really important when we talk about the arts and culture in terms of the bureaucracy and the processes that we need to put in place, that we actually think about why we're actually doing this. And hopefully the slides describe some of the artistic work that we support that helps us to remind us why we're in this room and why we're involved in thinking about how we can support the arts to reach more people across our countries. And I understand that we're going to be hearing from a couple of people who are very much involved in making art later on today, which I think is a really important part of these discussions. So, a little bit about the history. We're actually quite a mature, I won't say old, mature organisation, in that we were set up in 1946 after the Second World War, very much as a response to the government's aspiration to rebuild Britain. And what was very interesting at the time was that the government was thinking about the institutions that it needed to set up to support the social fabric of the country. And the Arts Council of Great Britain, as it was then called, was set up actually in the same year as the National Health Service, which runs all our hospitals. And I think that's really quite interesting that the government at the time thought that it was just as important to think about the cultural well-being of the country as the physical, mental, and other health issues that people across the country were experiencing. So I don't think it was a coincidence that those two institutions were set up at the same time, and we're very proud of the long heritage that we have across Britain. As I said, it was originally set up as the Arts Council of Great Britain, but some of you may be aware that Britain itself has established some devolution of its functions to the other home nations of the United Kingdom. So in the 1990s, arts councils were set up in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, and the institution that operates across England was set up as Arts Council England, and that's what I'm talking about today. Another interesting fact of our history is that we also have seen the development of regional arts development activity over quite a long period of time, very much since the 1950s and 60s, when local authorities across the country came together to establish what were then called regional arts associations. These were groups of local councils who were there to help support arts activities in their regions. And over time, these regional arts associations have developed until in 2003, they were then brought together with the National Arts Council. And so we are now one organisation with regional offices all the way across England. And we describe ourselves in the term of one confident organisation. So it's a single organisation with people out in the regions. And it's a very interesting development that's happened back home, which I'm looking at your situation here and thinking, how will that develop over time here? So I'm going to talk about a little bit about what we do. And I'm going to talk about our strategy, which is called Great Art for Everyone. That's our mission. That's what we aim to do. That's our plan. We want to make sure that as many people as possible can have access to wonderful cultural experiences. When we talk about the arts, we think about different kinds of art forms. So you can see them here on the slide. But I think what's important when we think about art forms is that we don't think of them in isolation to each other. We know very much that artists want to collaborate across art form boundaries. So we don't think of these in separate groups or separate budgets, for example. Years ago we had art form panels and art form budgets and decisions about money to different organisations organised by art form. Today we have budgets that cut across all of the art forms, because sometimes you just don't know whether something sits in one art form or another, and that's fine, that's good, that's important. We want to encourage blurring of boundaries. We want to encourage innovation in artistic practice, and we want to see new art forms emerging. We don't want to be stuck in the art forms of the past. But also, what's new to the Arts Council is that a couple of years ago, in 2011, we took on additional responsibility for museums and for libraries. So this adds to the remit that the Arts Council has, and how this is articulated is set out in these documents, which rather unsurprisingly I tend to refer as the pink and the blue books. You can kind of see why. So the pink book very much describes our strategy for the arts. Achieving Great Art for Everyone is a 10-year strategic framework which sets out a number of goals, which I'll talk about in a moment. And this is accompanied by the Blue Book, which documents how we intend to support development of museums and libraries across England. And for those of you who were at the session yesterday, I have a quiz at the end to see who can remember all of the 5 goals. And for those of you who are seeing these for the first time, I'll quickly run through them. But these very much aim to describe what it is that we're trying to achieve through the work that we do. And the first goal that we have is very much about supporting the talent and excellence of the arts in England. We want to see them thriving. We want to see them celebrated. We also, in our second goal, want to make sure that as many people as possible have access to those experiences and that they're inspired by the arts in their many different ways. Thirdly, we see the real importance of supporting arts and cultural organisations to be sustainable, resilient and innovative. These are very big words. Sustainable is very much about their ability to continue to develop what they do, but also sustainable in the environmental term, so that we can see them contributing towards being environmentally sustainable. We see the importance of resilience, particularly at these times of economic challenge in society, but also we want them to innovate, we want them to do new things. Fourthly, we see the importance of supporting the leadership of the arts sector, helping them to be brilliant at what they do in terms of running arts institutions, but also to make sure that the workforce is continually fed with new people who have appropriate skills and experience to be able to work in the sector. And finally, we have to think about children and young people, both as the producers, consumers, audiences of the future, but also people, young people who are experiencing the arts now, today, whether in schools or outside of schools. I love this picture. I don't know if people will have been familiar with this project. It's called The Sultan's Elephant. Took place in London in 2006. Basically, it's just a massive elephant that moved around the city streets. It closed London for a day, and there's not many things that can do that. We got permission, by the way, to close the streets of London, but it was a very wonderful event that millions of people turned out to enjoy. So a little bit about how we are organised as the Arts Council. We currently have 550 people working for us across 9 regions of England. So as I said before, the regional offices work across England. They're on the ground. They're the people who have face-to-face contact with arts organisations and other partners, but are all a part of the same organisation. We are governed by a national council, which is independent from government, and I'll say a bit more about that later. But we also have 9 regional councils, and the chair of each regional council is a member of the National Council, so it kind of works up from the bottom. And we have 3 main roles. Again, for those of you who heard me talk about this yesterday, I described in more detail how these roles work, but broadly speaking, we have a role to fund and invest in arts and cultural organisations, artists and activity. We have a development role, and I think it's really important, and Mr. Condor very rightly picked up on that discussion from yesterday, that there's an important development role for arts councils, which is about trying to understand the wider context within which the arts and culture are happening, and trying to take action to move things forward in relation to different elements of what's going on. And finally, advocacy. We champion the arts and culture unashamedly, unreservedly. That's our job. We stand up for the arts. So we get money from 2 different places. I'll just explain what this means. We get money which we call grant in aid from the government. So this is money that's raised through taxation, through public taxation, which is then passed to us from the government, which we then allocate to artists and arts organisations. But we're also beneficiaries of money from the National Lottery. The National Lottery set up in the 1990s has provided billions of pounds of support for arts and cultural projects across the whole of England. And the arts are very fortunate that they are one of the good causes that is supported out of the proceeds from the National Lottery. And we expend that through 3 different funding streams. We have a portfolio of funded organisations that get funding agreements from us for 3 years, so they get money for 3 years at a time. And we currently have 696 of those organisations across England. We also have an open application programme for project funding, which we call Grants for the Arts. So this can be for amazing ideas that artists and arts organisations can come up with. They tell us about their idea, and then we will award them funding. And finally, we have funding to support specific strategic initiatives. And this activity really supports our development function. So we identify a gap or a problem that we need to solve, and we will use strategic funding to help us to do that. This image is describing where the funded organisations across England are located. And the reason why I wanted to show this slide is because one of the important things about our role is about our ability to distribute funding across the whole of the country. When the organisation was set up in the 1940s, one of the things that the government particularly wanted to do was to ensure that people had access to the arts wherever they lived across the whole of the country, on the basis that London seemed to dominate in terms of its cultural provision at the time. There's still a heavy domination of activity in London. You'll see a lot of dots in the bottom right-hand corner there, where London still has a vibrant cultural scene. But what this also shows is that we support arts organisations across the whole of the country. And the different colours represent the different art form classifiers that we use for the different organisations that we fund. So, for example, the red dots are combined arts organisations, so they're organisations that operate in more than one art form. Or the yellow dots you can see are theatre organisations. So all different art forms taking place across all of the country. And these are those art forms. But I think it's important to say, as I said earlier, that we don't pigeonhole organisations into these groups. We recognise the fluidity of the arts, and we also recognise that there are a number of organisations that operate in what we might call sub-art form genres, particularly in music, for example, with jazz, or in literature, for example, with poetry. There's a very different range of specialist organisations that we support. We also support a number of key development areas. 3 particularly I'd like to just mention today. The first is around creative media, and this is particularly around how we are using digital technologies to enable new and different ways of producing artistic content and distributing that to a new and different audience through different technologies. The second area is around audiences and participation, and doing more to try to enable those people who have lower levels of engagement in different parts of the country, or perhaps to do with their individual circumstances, to see how we can help to give them more access to excellent arts experiences. And finally, children and young people, as I said, very important for us in terms of being able to give children and young people the tools that they need to be able to understand and engage with artistic practice as producers, as consumers, and also as commentators on what's going on in the world. So some examples of projects that we are supporting in those areas. The first I'll just mention is called The Space. And I do urge you to take a look at this if you get the opportunity to do that. You can find it at thespace.org. And this is a shot of the homepage. And you'll see that on The Space you can access a whole range of different creative media content. It's organized in different art form areas, and you can see a range of different activities, events, filmed pieces on The Space. And some is short form, so short pieces, some is long form. But it's very interesting, and I do urge you to take a look at that. This is a partnership that we have developed with the BBC. The BBC is clearly a big producer of cultural output, but it tends to do so in very linear form, using broadcast media to enable it to reach an audience. This is very much non-linear form, so it's using the internet in very different ways to be able for people to engage with and access content in ways that are appropriate to their interests. So a word about some of the principles that underpin our approach to arts funding, which I think are relevant to this conversation today. The first is that we don't fully fund anything that we support. We very much believe in the mixed economy approach, where we bring together public funding with private funding, earned income and philanthropy. And that mix of funding gives more sustainability to those organizations who are in receipt of these different types of funding. We always worry if organizations are particularly heavily dependent on one type of funding rather than another, and the more diverse the range of income sources that organizations have, the more sustainable they are likely to be in the longer term. Secondly is around accountability, and this is very important in relation to our role as separate from government, in that we are accountable for the funding that we receive from government. We are accountable to government for that funding. And likewise, the organizations that we award money to in the form of grants are accountable to us. So they need to report what they do with the money to us, and we need to report what we do with the money to government. Public benefit is also a key aspect of our remit. Because we use public money, we always need to ensure that at some stage the public will benefit from that investment. But I think it's also important to say that we do support risk-taking, we support innovation, and we support artistic risk in what artists do. And the public benefit may not always be immediate, but it may be happening in the longer term. And finally, to say that we support quality in everything that we do, and the things that we support will always rise to a certain standard of quality. And what that does is that it means that if someone is in receipt of funding from the Arts Council, they will tend to use that as a badge of status, because we only support the best things, so they know if they get money from the Arts Council that they can identify what they do as good quality. Quick word about libraries and museums, and I'm not quite sure how they fit into the conversation here today, but we were asked to take on responsibility for libraries and museums a couple of years ago, although they have very different funding relationships. So libraries, for example, are funded primarily by local authorities, museums from a variety of other sources. But we have a program that is called Renaissance, which is basically about funding museums across England. So we do support museums to develop what they do, to improve their work, and to reach wider audiences. So a word about partnerships. Here's a picture of a new gallery that we've recently supported being built in Nottingham, which is in the Midlands of England. And we've actually supported quite a lot of new buildings, particularly using the lottery funding that I talked about earlier on, which has transformed the cultural infrastructure that we have, improved facilities for artists and the public alike. So we work with government, but we are arm's length from government. So what this means is that we were set up as an independent organisation, and we remain free from influence from government ministers. The particular reason why that was done was largely to do with the issue of influence over artistic taste. And ministers at the time very much felt that it was important that experts in the arts should decide and judge what is appropriate to fund in the arts, and not politicians. And that remains true today. And government very much do remain at arm's length from the Arts Council when it comes to making decisions about which artists or which organisations to fund. And we cherish that arm's length relationship. In addition, when we were established, this is a quote, the one in the middle here, from our founding charter in 1946, and it says that we are required to advise and cooperate with government departments and local authorities in matters concerned with these purposes. What that means is that partnership with government departments and with local government is absolutely part of our DNA. It's what we're there for. It's what we're there to do. So that kind of cooperation is intrinsic in what we are about. So what does other government departments mean? Well, I'll give you 3 examples of government departments that we work with. Our funding is channeled through our sponsor department, which is called the Department for Culture, Media and Sport. But that also then enables us to work with other government departments. Firstly, the Department for Education, which we work with to help to improve the quality and standards of arts education taking place in schools and outside of school. Recently, the Department for Education has awarded us a figure of around £60 million a year to fund a programme of music education for every young child in England. So we have a very significant relationship now with the Department for Education. The Department for Communities and Local Government is also a very important relationship for us, where we work with them to support the development of arts and cultural practice as part of economic development and regeneration in places and communities across the whole of England. And finally, the Department for Business, Innovation and Skills, where we work with them to influence support for businesses engaging in the creative industries and how we're using digital media to grow the economy. We also have a wide range of other partnerships, and these are just a very small number of examples of the kinds of partnerships that we have. I won't go into them in a lot of detail, but broadly speaking, they fall into different categories, such as other cultural bodies operating at a national level, other non-governmental organisations, commercial organisations we work with, as well as broadcasters, and also local enterprise partnerships, which are new organisations which work at a local level to support the development of the economy in local areas. I love this photo. This is from a carnival arts organisation in Luton, which is in the east of England. So some of the challenges that we're experiencing at the moment arise very much from the economic context in which we find ourselves. I'm sure I don't need to go into much detail about how that is affecting our government and the impact that that is likely to have on our ability to sustain public funding for the arts. But we also have particular infrastructure challenges for being able to sustain the level of investment that we're able to award to different arts organisations. We also have and want to have new relationships with the arts sector, and what this means is that we want to work more in partnership with arts organisations rather than seeing arts organisations as being accountable to the Arts Council in terms of its relationship. We want to develop a greater sense of equality about that relationship. But of course, there is more scrutiny on any element of public sector funding, which we have to also respond to. Here's a nice picture. And I'm not going to go into detail about this one either, but I just want to show you where culture fits in terms of government funding. And there are lots of blobs on this document which really describe the different funding that government gives to different areas of its work. And culture is over here. It's very small. So we argue that the things that we do are very important to the country, both in terms of its well-being and in terms of its economy. So to make further cuts to the arts budget, given it's such a small amount anyway, is going to have a very disproportionate negative impact on our ability to provide public value in what we do. So that's the little green blob on its own, and there you can see how that money is distributed on a range of different activities, and you can see that on the right is where the arts budget sits. And this is the Arts Council here. So even the Arts Council gets a proportion of this total spent on culture, media and sport. And the public funding environment is very tough. So at this current spending period that we're in, we have received a nearly 30% cut in our basic grant, which is making it very difficult for us to continue to provide the level of funding that arts organisations need. The regularly funded organisations, the MPOs that we support, have been cut by around 7% in 2011-12, but that the total cut will be around 15% by 2015. And our administration costs have been cut by 50%. So the money that we spend on ourselves, we have to reduce by 50%. So we're operating in a very challenging environment to be able to continue to do all of the things that I've talked about with less resource. And of course then one of the most important things that we have to do is to demonstrate how we measure impact of what we do. And the fundamental issue here is how we demonstrate the value that we add through the the work and the money that we have, and how we add value socially, culturally, and economically. But also how we measure our performance against the 5 goals you'll remember that I talked about earlier on. So in each of those goals we want to see progress, we want to see action taken place, and how do we measure our performance against those goals. So in terms of the funding that we distribute, we use a range of different monitoring mechanisms across the different strands of funding that we use. So for our funded organisations, for the MPOs, we monitor them on a 3-monthly basis by assessing how they're doing, assessing the risk to their ability to fulfil their obligations to the grant. We also ask them to complete an annual survey which gives us more information and data about the work that they do. We encourage them to participate in their own evaluation. We call this the self-evaluation framework. We help them to understand how they can improve their own performance. We have a program of artistic assessment where we work with 150 independent peer artistic assessors to give us reports on the performance of those organizations. And through our Grants for the Arts project funding program, we ask people who receive grants to give us reports on the work that they do. We also have a number of schemes that help us to monitor the funding that we issue. In the museums world, we have 2 schemes which help us to assess the value and contribution of museums. Designation is around establishing exemplary collections in museums. So designated collections are usually the best collections in the country. And accreditation is a standard that all museums aspire to achieve, and we won't fund a museum that isn't accredited by us. We also undertake research that helps us to understand the impact of our funding. The Taking Part survey measures audience engagement across the country. And our stakeholder research helps us to understand not only what our partners think about the work that we do, but also measures public attitudes towards public funding of the arts and culture. And that's it. And a nice picture to finish with too. Thank you. I don't know if you have time for questions now. Leave that until. It's fine if you do.
今
So, would you like to pose any questions?
ではまた
If not, we'll have an opportunity for questions afterwards.
やりますよ。
ありがとうございました。一つだけ。
Thank you. I've got just one question.
先ほど長官からのお話もあり。
Well, Mr. Kondo mentioned that in Japan, there is a debate, or there are debates rather, about arts councils in Japan right now. In the case of the UK, the local councils, the local governments, the arts councils, is there any way to learn more about the process by which the arts councils themselves were formed? Because we have an arts council here in Tokyo, but that's not the end of the story. In the case of the UK, what was the historic evolution which allowed you to create the nationwide network? If you could give us some insight into that, I'd appreciate that tremendously.
There are, it's a very good question and very pertinent to your situation, I understand. And of course, with 60 years of history, there's a lot I could say, but we haven't got 60 years to discuss it, so I will keep my response brief. I think there are two issues that I'd highlight that we need to think about. The first is efficiency, and Mr. Condor referred to this issue of efficiency, which is very important for us because, as you've seen in my presentation, we are facing reductions in the costs that we can apply to our own administration. So we have to think very carefully about how we organize ourselves and how we make sure that we spend as little as possible on the processing of funding applications and make sure that more money goes to artists and arts organizations. The situation that we found ourselves in over quite a long period of time, I'm talking about tens of years, is that increasingly the work that the Arts Council and the regional arts councils were doing was producing duplication. There was a duplication of effort. And what that meant was that there were some processes that we could reform to create greater efficiency if we centralized them. So broadly speaking, there's quite a strong efficiency requirement that we have that drove us to think about how we could continue to provide the support and service to artists and arts organizations and the public while spending less on ourselves and making sure that we were as efficient as possible. And that conclusion has driven us to bringing all of those organizations together in a single body. But you have to understand that that body is separate from local government, which itself continues to provide support to the arts in England. And that brings me to the second point, which is about localism. Localism is an increasingly important policy agenda for our government because they think that it's very important for local people to have a say in what goes on in their area. So the important relationship that now the National Arts Council has with local councils, local government, very much respects the national overview that we have for the arts and culture, working hand in hand with local government on the ground who know and understand their communities. So we have now, hopefully, a good system which combines an efficient organization with locally accountable bodies, and the partnership between those two organizations hopefully produces good support and funding for artists, arts organizations and the public, both locally and across the whole of the country. The challenge, of course, that we find is that local government, local councils are all very different from each other. So we have to work with them in ways that are appropriate to them. In England, there are 350 of them. So we also have to be selective about which ones we can work with the most and how we can do that effectively. So I hope that goes some way to answering your question.
ありがとうございました。
Thank you very much. And we now like to break. And this is the end of part 1.